Is it two monologues? Well, we shall see. Welcome to episode 10 of Intruder Theatre in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Remi Rachuba, and thank you so much for coming back. Now, this is the 10th episode, maybe 10th and a half, because we've got the trailer, so a little bit of a celebration today. Also recording this episode at the window, so you might hear a little bit of background noise from cars and traffic, which actually means that there is still life going on, although it's lockdown, to be quite honest. So hopefully it's not going to be that noisy, although it's Friday 9 p.m. Now, when we go back in time and we think of what happened in episode 9, titled That Ending, I talked about putting final touches to the solo piece and how I worked with the Polish director, how I got involved in Lucia de Lammermoor, directed by Katie Mitchell at the Royal Opera House, and how I redrafted the piece and when I sent it to Peter Arnott, a Scottish playwright, to read it. And then when Peter emailed me, he asked, is it two monologues? And I was thinking, is it two monologues? What does he mean by that? But I thought, well, I know what he was getting at. When I was working with the Polish director, we performed the piece, which was going really, really well. But both of us, we felt that I needed to write more about, especially teaching in Scotland, and I actually expanded certain sections of the text, because both of us and I felt that I think it needed to be addressed. So then when Peter emailed me back, I thought, well, does he mean that it's too much? But I wasn't really sure, because I thought, well, it didn't seem that way when we were working on the piece together with Kasia, the Polish director, but I couldn't be 100% certain. So I went back to the piece, and it was August 2016, so I hadn't really looked at the play for about 5-6 months. And I remember I sat down, and I was in Old Street in London at a coffee shop called Look Mum No Hands. It's where I worked very often because I loved that place, and they had, I think, for me, the best coffee in London. And I started reading it, and immediately when I maybe read 3-4 pages, I felt, wow, this is really interesting, but unnecessary. And it felt very laboured. And I also remember thinking, just Remi, get on with it. Just get on with that story. I always loved the piece, and it still makes me laugh. But then I was feeling that, you know what, the story is not progressing, is not moving forward. There is a lot of detail in it, but I just need to move on with it. So then I agreed with Peter that the extra bits, that I had been working on and I had been writing, that was too much. And me, I actually was feeling it, like it was just overwritten. But back in the day, at the beginning of 2016, I didn't feel it. Maybe I needed that time to look at the piece again, and the break helped me detach myself from the play and then look at it afresh, which always is a good thing. So then I felt, okay, I need to look at it again. But the good thing was that it wasn't the full play that was kind of overwritten. It was just the very first 10 or 15 pages. But just the idea of going back to the text again and revisiting it again and redrafting it, I was kind of dreading it. I was thinking, oh God, I need to do it again. But there was, if I'm not going to do it, nobody's going to do it for me. So it was inevitable. And I remember that I started going back and I looked at the previous versions of the play, and I started comparing it. And gradually, step by step, I was editing it. I was deleting. I was pressing that delete button more frequently than normal. But I really wanted to make sure that the play had that structure of what it was before. But it wasn't just straight deleting. It was just making sure that it all makes sense. But the good thing was, as I said, it was only 10 or 15 pages. And actually, it didn't take me that long to kind of go through it. As I was saying, I approached it maybe not particularly, dreading it, but not really being very positive about it. But it didn't take me that long to work on that new draft of that new draft kind of thing. And when I did it, I knew that there was one more thing that I needed to work on. Because you might remember I was saying that, the first half of the piece is very non-linear, but the second half was more linear. So was pure storytelling. And I always wanted to have that non-linear structure, but I really didn't know how to go about doing it. So I was actually quite pleased that I kind of pulled it back, that I re-edited the piece, and it wasn't overwritten. It kind of was back where it was, a year earlier, but I still knew that, I still need to work on the piece because, it's very uneven. The structure was very uneven, and even George from the National Theatre of Scotland, he pinpointed that, and I knew that I needed to work on that, but I didn't know how. I just didn't know what to do, and no idea. And in episode 1 of the podcast, which is titled Influential Filmmakers, I talked about going to see different films and theatre and galleries, going to galleries and just being stimulated. And I always think it's very, very important to see other pieces of work, just to experience something different, seeing how other people do it, how other people see certain things, and because you never know where it's going to take you, whether it's going to be helpful for your creative process. I don't know, I've always been interested in other artists because it always inspired me to work on something else, or maybe apply something from what someone else did, and maybe use it in my own work. And that was in the case of, as I was saying, Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia and Christopher Nolan's Inception, that I loved these films so much that I thought, okay, if I'm going to have a piece of writing or a play, I want to have that kind of non-linear structure. But, I still needed to do something about the ending. I mean, not to finish the ending, but to kind of change it so that it was very even structure-wise. And back in November 2016, I went to see a film directed by Tom Ford, titled Nocturnal Animals. And it was one of these usual cinema trips, because I go to the cinema quite often, once, or twice a week. I really didn't treat it as anything exceptional. I had watched another film by Tom Ford, As Single Man, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, so I was very interested in what he was going to do next. I knew that the film was about an author, but that was really it. I didn't know much about what it was about, as I don't read reviews. I don't want to have any spoiler alerts. So I just went to see it. I think it was a Friday after one of these interpreting jobs that I had in Kensington, I remember. And when I was watching it, I think halfway through the film, I realized, oh my god, my solo piece needs to have the same structure like it is in that film. Because it became very clear, well, as far as I remember, that in Nocturnal Animals there are two sub-stories that meet at some point towards the end of the film. And I thought, this is it. That's what I need in my solo piece. And then I immediately went home and I started redrafting my solo piece. And thinking about, okay, where am I going to put this bit, that event, this sub-story? And all of a sudden, everything started to make sense. Because I wasn't dreading redrafting it anymore. I think because of the fact that I knew that I finally, all of a sudden, I know what the structure of the solo piece is going to be. So that gave me a lot of encouragement and incentive to work on it, because it was some kind of a moment where I thought, oh my god, I found the solution. I think that's what it is. And my intuition was telling me that was that structure that I needed. Also, the other thing was that I was quite happy that, I had re-edited because I didn't have as much text now as I had back in August. So I was really pleased that I had already redrafted it, because it kind of was overlapping. At the very beginning, I put an event. That's what I remember that Zinni Harris was telling us when I was doing that playwriting workshop at the Travers Theatre back in, I think, 2011, that it's always good to maybe start a play with an event and an aftermath of an event. But also the other thing was that, like sometimes in films you have a scene. At the beginning of the film you have a scene from the middle of the film, which I actually don't see much at the moment, but I loved that idea that there was some kind of element at the very beginning and then we see it later on in the film. So I changed it in this way as well, and all of a sudden I felt, this is it. That's the structure. And I remember I titled that version of my solo piece The Visitor, because that was the title of the solo piece then, the intuitive version, because intuitively I felt that's what it should be. Although I wasn't sure, but I think maybe I was feeling that whenever I had that gut feeling, I should go with it. I always believed in my gut feeling, but not much as far as the writing was concerned. That was the very first time that I thought, I think this is it. And I think with time I developed my gut feeling developed more. Even recently when I was working on something again, I believed in my intuition and feeling that I think that's the way it should, that's the direction it should go. So coming back, I saved that draft as the intuitive version, hoping that, that's the version, the right version. And as always with any version, any new redraft, I sent it, I emailed it. And I actually checked my emails, and I worked on that intuitive version very fast, because I saw that film at the beginning of November, and I had already emailed it to George Aza-Selinger, to Peter Arnott, and someone else mid-November. So it took me about a week to work on it, which was quite an achievement. So I must have been quite motivated and driven to come up with that version, which is very interesting. It's very interesting when you go through old emails and find out things that you don't remember. I sent it to George, but what happened with George Aza-Selinger, actually a character in my podcast, because I talk about George so often. I feel like he is one of my main characters in it. When I emailed George, he emailed me back saying that he was leaving the National Theatre of Scotland, and although he appreciated the fact that I sent him the two versions, he wouldn't be able to actually read them. And that was actually the end of that story with George, because I never ever then sent him any more versions. I still keep in touch with him, but that was the end of his help as far as my solo piece is concerned. And when I reflect, George played a key role in my in helping me with my play. His encouragement, his support. Because of them, I managed to complete my solo piece, and I am eternally grateful to him, and I always have been. But even now, when I have been working on my podcast, I realized how important he has been in my whole process, and I'm very grateful to him. And hopefully he listens, and when he listens, and I will email him as well, I really would like to thank him for his help. So thank you, George. So George is already out of the loop. He's not going to help me with my solo piece. The next person I emailed was Peter Arnott, as always. But I knew that with Peter, he had been very busy in 2016. So although he was telling me to send him the latest drafts, he always told me, Remi, I'm busy with my new projects. And I think that year he was publishing a book and had a new play put on. So he was always telling me that, you know what, I will have a scan read, but feel free to send it to someone else. Maybe they will have a different point of view, because I may have a look at it, but you know, I'm involved in other projects. So because of that, I kind of felt, okay, I have kind of, you know, I can send it to someone else to have a look at the play. The third person that I sent it to was Linda McLean. Linda McLean is a Scottish playwright who I met when I was at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. She was part of my MACCT course, and you might remember when I talked about studying at the Conservatoire, we had, I think I did mention it, we had 3 playwrights that worked with us, and that was David Harrower, Douglas Maxwell, and Linda McLean. And I never worked with Linda on our final pieces, because the playwrights were commissioned to write 3 pieces for 3 groups. So I was never in Linda's group, I was in David Harrower's group, but of course we knew each other, and we as students, we were asked to read the plays, and I always loved Linda's writing and the plays, her plays, Stranger Babies and Riddance and One Good Beating and Shimmer, because Linda plays with structure, and I always loved it. And maybe that's why I thought of her, that maybe I could email her, and I thought maybe she would be the right person to maybe give me some feedback. And I also knew her, so we've been emailing, we've been in touch since I graduated, and you know, she's been always very kind, and she's very warm and kind and with an amazing sense of humor. So it also goes back to what I was saying, and I think one of my previous episodes, that it's always good to be in touch with people, because it's you always can come back to them and ask them for help, like I did. And I was also advised to contact her by Amanda Gohan. You might remember Amanda from also my previous episodes. She studied with me also on my MACCT course. She was doing directing and I was doing acting. And Amanda was helping me with my research and development on my solo piece when I got funding from Creative Scotland, and that was back in 2012. So Amanda was also suggesting, Remi, maybe get in touch with Linda, because, you know, she writes plays that have a different structure, so maybe she could help you with that. And I thought, okay, it would be great to contact Linda. And I initially emailed Linda back in July of 2016, just to have this kind of a, you know, initial conversation whether if Linda could actually help me and could read my play. And Linda, of course, emailed me immediately and said, Remi, yes, I would be very willing to read your play, but not at the moment. I really need more time because I'm very busy. I'm working on my own plays, maybe towards the end of the year. And I'm glad I did, because actually if I had emailed her my older versions in July of 2016, it would have been the same, because I came up with that intuitive version at the end of 2016. So the timing was perfect, and in hindsight, I think that, you know, we may want something, but actually the universe has a different plan for us. And, you know, according to the universe, that time is right, not what we think is correct. And that was the case. So I had actually two people. I emailed the two versions, the old version and the intuitive version, to Peter Arnott and to Linda, and that was it. And then in January 2017, I was sending gentle reminders to Peter and to Linda, asking them whether they read my versions. Peter came back to me and said, Remi, I've been very, very busy with my work, so I've not had time. I will give it a scan read when I have time. But Peter was always encouraging me and saying to me, but don't feel disheartened. Even if if that version, the new version, is not working, stay assured that you can always go back to that linear way of storytelling. And I always felt, that's great. That's always something that I can fall back on. But intuitively, I knew that, it needs to be that non-linear way of storytelling that I hope it works, because I think that's the way it should be. I just felt that was the right way of telling that story. And finally, Linda emailed me. But what it was, and whether she liked it, and whether I needed to redraft my solo piece again, that's going to be in episode 11 of Intruder Theatre in the Making podcast. thank you so much for tuning in. Stay well, stay safe, and I speak to you next time. Bye for now.